A government spokesperson stood in front of cameras and called the President of the United States ignorant, not a rival nation, not an enemy leader mid-war, a trade partner, one that ships you more products than any other country on Earth. So why would anyone with that much money on the line risk burning the relationship over a few words on cable news? Because the insult touched a nerve. And once you see the numbers behind that nerve, you'll understand why the world's balance of power may have already tipped, and almost nobody in Washington wants to admit it. In October 1967, a politician recently defeated on the national stage published an essay in Foreign Affairs that redefined America's approach to China. Richard Nixon warned that keeping 1 billion people in isolation was not just impractical, it was dangerous. He argued that China's exclusion from the international system would fuel instability, and that the United States could not afford to ignore such a vast and capable society. Less than 5 years later, Nixon, now president, landed in Beijing. The handshake between Nixon and Mao Zedong in February 1972 was more than a diplomatic breakthrough. It was the opening move in a strategy that would shape global power for decades. The premise was clear. By bringing China into the world economy, by engaging rather than isolating, the United States could guide China toward openness and eventually democracy. Successive presidents inherited this logic, convinced that integration would change China more than it would change the world. On February 1, 1980, the United States granted China most favored nation trading status, opening the door to a flood of commerce but tying the arrangement to an annual review by Congress. Each year, lawmakers debated whether to continue these terms, linking renewal to human rights and political reforms that never materialized. For 2 decades, the relationship hung on this conditional thread. Then, in 2000, Congress voted to make trade access permanent. The Permanent Normal Trade Relations Bill passed after fierce lobbying from American corporations eager for a share of China's vast market, even as critics warned that the move gave away leverage without securing real concessions. Just a year later, China entered the World Trade Organization, gaining access to global markets under rules negotiated in Geneva and Washington. Throughout this period, Chinese leaders maintained public restraint, repeating assurances that their rise would be peaceful and mutually beneficial. Behind the scenes, the Communist Party focused on quiet self-strengthening, building industrial and technological capacity, while avoiding open confrontation or dramatic gestures that might alarm the West. The result was a deepening economic integration, but not the political liberalization that many in Washington had expected. Between 2000 and 2008, Chinese exports soared from roughly $250 billion to nearly $1.5 trillion. Factories across Guangdong and Zhejiang ran day and night, feeding a global appetite for cheap electronics, textiles, and machinery. While container ships left Chinese ports stacked high, the United States was consumed by conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. Washington spent trillions on military campaigns and reconstruction, while thousands of American lives were lost on foreign soil. In the same years, China quietly absorbed Western capital, technology, and know-how, all while keeping tight control over its political system. The relationship, once imagined as a path toward mutual transformation, became sharply unbalanced. China accumulated reserves and manufacturing power, growing more self-reliant with each passing year. The United States, distracted and overextended, found itself funding both its own wars and the rise of a new economic giant. The contrast could not have been starker. One power mired in costly conflict, the other building strength through patience and discipline. The collapse of Wall Street in 2008 did more than shake global markets. For China's leadership, the financial crisis exposed the limits of Western economic management and revealed a vulnerability at the heart of American power. As banks failed and unemployment soared across the United States and Europe, China's economy kept growing, supported by a massive stimulus package and a tightly managed financial system. In September of that year, a Chinese diplomat stated that the crisis had shown the fragility of the Western-led system and that China's role in the world would inevitably become larger and more important. Inside the Communist Party, the old doctrine of keeping a low profile began to lose its appeal. Senior officials debated whether quiet restraint still served China's interests. or if it was time to assert greater influence on the world stage. Meanwhile, United States analysts pored over reports on Chinese weapons systems and military hardware, missing the broader transformation underway. The crisis was not just a shock to markets, it was a turning point in how Beijing saw its place in the global order. Xi Jinping took office in 2013 and quickly moved away from the cautious diplomacy that had defined his predecessors. He called for China to take its place at the center of world affairs, rejecting the old doctrine of hiding capabilities and waiting for the right moment. Under his direction, the state launched a full-scale effort to close the technology gap with the West. New policies directed billions toward advanced manufacturing, artificial intelligence, and green energy, aiming to make China not just a participant in global markets, but a leader. The ambition extended far beyond industry. China established new global institutions, including the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Silk Road Fund, offering loans and investment to countries that had long depended on Western financing. These moves weren't isolated projects. They were pieces of a coordinated plan to build a parallel system of economic and diplomatic influence. Washington pressed its closest allies to keep their distance, but the pressure failed. Britain, Germany, South Korea, and Australia all joined China's new institutions, signaling a shift in the global balance of trust. At the same time, China unveiled the Belt and Road Initiative, a sprawling infrastructure program spanning more than 60 countries and dwarfing the scale of the post-war Marshall Plan. The project tied ports, railways, and power grids across Asia, Africa, and Europe to Chinese capital and expertise. Each step was a calculated move to reduce reliance on Western-led systems and to anchor China's rise in hard assets and global relationships. Measured by purchasing power, China's economy now stands larger than America's. But the real transformation lies beneath the surface, in the machinery of production. Chinese factories turn out nearly 3 times as much as their American counterparts. The United States, once the undisputed workshop of the world, now claims only about 15% of global manufacturing. China's share approaches 1/3, levels unseen since America's own industrial heyday a century ago. The scale is staggering. China produces 20 times more cement than the United States and 13 times more steel. Its auto plants assemble 3 times as many cars. The energy sector generates double the output. In chemicals, China supplies about half the world's needs. In electric vehicles, the lead is even sharper. Over 2/3 of global EVs, more than 3/4 of all EV batteries, and nearly 90% of solar panels and refined rare earths come from Chinese plants. Consumer drones, once a niche product, are now 80% made in China. Automation and advanced manufacturing have accelerated the divide. Each year, Chinese factories install more industrial robots than the rest of the world combined. The country has also pulled ahead in next-generation nuclear reactor technology, building capacity for energy independence and export. No other nation has held this level of industrial dominance since the United States at its manufacturing peak. The numbers are not just impressive, they are the material foundation of leverage in today's global system. China's population advantage, combined with decades of investment in education, has produced a vast pool of engineers and scientists. The country now files more international patents than any other, reflecting a surge in homegrown innovation. Its armed forces are the largest in the world by personnel, and while the United States still leads in commercial aviation, China is closing the gap in fighter jet technology, including building its own jet engines. Chinese shipyards now launch vessels at a pace that dwarfs American output, supporting the world's largest navy by ship count. American weapons remain more advanced, but the war in Ukraine has shown that technological edge alone does not guarantee rapid success. The measure of power now lies in depth, scale, and the ability to sustain effort over time. Europe's factories now outproduce America's in steel, automobiles, ships, and civilian aircraft. The continent's manufacturing workforce stands at nearly 3 times the size of its U.S. counterpart. Yet, instead of forging closer industrial alliances, Washington has found itself at odds with its oldest partners, pushing tariffs and trade barriers that strain relationships across the Atlantic. The rift has left the United States more isolated, even as China's economic influence continues to grow. In 2024, China shipped an estimated $439 billion in goods to the United States, while American exports to China reached only about $143.5 billion. With tariffs on both sides now exceeding 100%, the flow of goods between the world's two largest economies has slowed to a crawl. For some in Washington, this imbalance looks like a sign of weakness for Beijing. But the reality is more complicated. China's larger export volume gives it leverage. The United States cannot quickly replace what it imports, especially in critical sectors. Analysts warn that this moment echoes the final years of the Soviet Union, when overconfidence and fractured alliances left Moscow exposed. One economist draws a sharper analogy, comparing the current trade war to America's own miscalculation in Vietnam, a contest where initial confidence masked the limits of power. The verdict is clear. Leverage today is measured not by ideology, but by the hard math of dependence. The United States, for all its rhetoric, now faces a world where it is more exposed than it once imagined. Today, China commands the world's largest manufacturing base, outpaces the US in shipbuilding, and holds more patents annually than any nation. The assumption of inevitable westernization has collapsed into a contest of leverage. Is this a lost bet or a new era? Share your perspective below. Subscribe for more analysis.